Hello and welcome to our political activist track panel. This panel is titled Organizing for Social Change, and I'm joined by activists and organizers all across the country who are doing this work and have been doing this work. So I'm gonna hand it to our incredible moderator, Nikita Oliver. They are an extremely I from Minnesota am looking up to the organizing that they're doing in Seattle, and I just cannot wait for this conversation. So I will hand it to you for the rest of this conversation.
Well, peace and good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. I am here in the coastal Salish territories on Duwamish, Suquamish land, surrounded by tribes like the Muckleshoot, Tulalip, Nisqually, Snohomish, and want to acknowledge all of the tribes upon whose land and waterways we traverse, and want to encourage those who are watching this broadcast to get to know who are the native peoples of the land that you're on, and what can you be doing to be standing in solidarity with them, because we know that Black liberation and Native sovereignty are two inextricably related fights that we all need to be a part of. I'm really excited to be moderating this panel today. And again, my name is Nikita Oliver. I use they, them pronouns. And I hope that you'll get your pens out and take some notes and get ready to get engaged. I want to first start by giving each of our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves however you see fit, whether that's based on who your family is and who you're connected to, or what you view to be your professional or community work. I want to hear how you view yourself first and foremost. So I'm going to pass it to Iman, because we do know each other a little bit, and give folks time to settle in.
Yeah, thank you, Nikita, for starting us off and grounding us. I really appreciate that. My name is Iman. I use she, her pronouns. And yeah, I'm from Seattle. So it's kind of nice to have the diversity of location of folks speaking on this panel. I would say I like the way Nikita posed the question of how you view yourself. So I'm going to be kind of focusing on someone who's just dedicated to community. I love being around, love and support and all of those things. And that's kind of what keeps me grounded in the work. But I will say, for context, I was a student. I just graduated during the pandemic. I studied law, societies, and justice, and minored in human rights. But I will say I learned a lot more on the ground as a student organizer, and now, I guess, full-time organizer. Like, it's still weird, like, titling yourself in that box. I feel like there's a lot of responsibility that comes with organizing. And so I'm still learning all the loops, but I will say a lot of it is grounded in abolition and undoing carceral systems, and supporting our Black and brown youth who are constantly being suppressed by that system. I'm an immigrant, so I can see those parallels of being Black, Muslim, and a woman, and just seeing how the system continues to deteriorate people with intersecting identities. So that's what keeps me grounded in this work. And I will let Nikita call on the next person.
All right, we'll pass it to Anissa.
It's going to be hard following that amazing introduction. Hello, everybody. I'm Anissa. I'm from Mankato, Minnesota. I'm an organizer right now with Ignite the Youth, a youth-led organization here in Mankato. And a little bit about myself. I kind of am grounded when it comes to, I think about like my family and my community, who am I accountable to and who is accountable to me. I'm also really deep diving into abolition, because over the summer, I came to the realization that these systems have never or can never really be changed to benefit Black and brown individuals. So I'm fairly new to this work. I consider myself to be a baby abolitionist, learning, and I'm very excited to be here on this panel with Iman and Nikita and Jael and learn more. Yeah, and pronouns are she, her, and I'll leave it at that.
And Jael, let's hear from you, last but not least.
Thank you, Nikita, and thank you all for being here. I think when I think of me as a person, I think of immigrating here when I was 18 months old. And I can remember I came from the country of Kenya, and my parents were just so they were brought into a world where they were like, what's going on? Like our hope is to give our children this better future, but things like race relations or the tensions of race and class aren't as exposed as they were in Kenya, and they definitely don't translate the same way. So I can remember early on trying to navigate as a young girl what that meant. Why was my race so pertinent to my peers? Why did they treat me differently based on my race? And I think as I grew up, I started to see so many of the differences that existed. And then I probably would have called it disparities. I wouldn't have been able to name or use a language for it, but it was the things that I was pushing for. And I think when I figure out what my purpose is of trying to make this a better place, because Black women like me and young Black girls are in the same position wanting to aspire, like that's where I get my energy from. I'm at the University of Minnesota, so I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and have done work in trying to rename our racist buildings on campus, work that's still going, whether it's getting a class on anti-Blackness and racism, or it's working for our universities to not use the Minneapolis Police Department. Whatever it is, organizer is such a hard term for me because I feel like I'm with you, Anise. I feel like I'm a baby in this work, and just looking to learn from so many others. I feel like there's so much work that has been done over the years, and I almost feel honored to be a part of this and be in such circles because there's so much to learn. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for those beautiful introductions. I think we can learn a lot from stories and hearing people's experiences. Lived experience is such an important factor of the work that we do. You know, I feel like often I'm asked to list out my professional experience, but usually the schooling I've had or the conferences I've been to are not the reasons why I got into the work that I do. It's because of my lived experience. Could each of you share a story about how you became a community organizer? And I know we don't like to give those titles to ourselves, but I've heard each of y'all's bios, and I know that you are community organizers. And a lot of people watching this probably are as well, and they wouldn't attribute that label to themselves. And so maybe hearing a story from you about how you got into organizing would be really useful. And we'll start with Anissa.
I got into organizing the first time I was in electoral organizing, and I left that in around 2018. That wasn't a conducive space for me. And then I ran for student body president. And so on behalf of that, I was able to organize to assist Black and Brown students and international students with getting pay when the campus was closed during COVID, ensuring that international students had access to the emergency grant, because for so long it was just domestic students who had access to it, and ensuring that there was food assistance for students who are food insecure through setting up an app, and individuals could donate meal swipes to individuals who are food insecure. And then over the summer, right after the tragic murder of George Floyd, I was like, I have to get involved. And what I noticed when I was trying to organize in a few of the nonprofit spaces is that it's like they just want you there for your face. Like you're not there to like challenge anything or question anything. Like you just go along with what they say. And the minute I spoke out against what they said, they really moved me very fast out of that space. And so I wanted to create a space for Black and Brown youth, especially because our voice is very silenced here in rural Minnesota. I wanted to create a space where we can organize. And so I organized with Ignite the Youth, and our mission was to remove police from 3 out of our 19 schools. And it was only one middle school that had it. And that middle school had a more Black and Brown students as opposed to the one that was in the affluent neighborhood. And my experience in the school system is from like getting suspended in 3rd grade for doing the same thing my white counterparts were doing. And then that continued on all the way throughout high school, consistently being referred to law enforcement because I was too loud or my tone wasn't correct when I was talking to administrators. And so that is truly what fueled my work to like get those police officers out of those schools, because I was charged when I was 16 with a felony assault, and that happened at that same school. And now seeing all of the individuals I graduated with, especially Black and Brown individuals, go in and out of the Blue Earth County Jail is something that propelled our organization to tackle that, because we do owe Black and Brown youth, especially current students, the ability to access their futures. And in these school systems, oftentimes their futures are truly beaten out of them. And so we just wanted to create a space where they could organize, and how I could help them organize, or what they needed from me, and let them lead. And so I've learned a lot from young individuals, like the students I've been able to organize with. And so that's a little bit about how I was introduced with how I got into community organizing.
Thank you so much for sharing your personal experience. And I don't think people often realize how often young people get criminalized in our schools, and the impact that has just on someone's life trajectory. And so thank you for illuminating that for us. We have another guest, another panelist. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself real quick before we hop back into this question. So glad to have you.
Hi, I'm so sorry I was a little late. My name is Metadel. My pronouns are she, her, and I attend Hamlin. I'm currently a junior. Thank you for allowing me to join this conversation. I do want to say I heard somebody saying that you're not comfortable with the term activist or organizer, and I'm very much in that same area and it's because I think we're doing a lot to decentralize power, and I love that. And I feel like sometimes titles create barriers for other people to be invited into the work, and I want to continue to invite people into being part of the community and doing the work. So I'm with you on that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And also, what can we do, though, so that more people view themselves as organizers, more people view themselves as advocates and activists, rather than seeing these labels or these words as only for a certain group of people? And what are we doing to continue to build up new leadership in our leaderful movements to ensure that, whether we're around or not, that the movement continues to go? One thing Ella Baker said, one of our great ancestors, is that strong people do not need strong leaders. And that was really an effort to point us towards building strong communities that don't need leadership at the forefront, because we're leading ourselves together as a collective. So that's really beautiful. Thank you for bringing that into the conversation. Iman, what brought you into organizing? What locked you in?
I feel like when I was hearing Anissa speak, I was like, there's so many little moments that you're just like, I can't go to sleep at night knowing that I've reached a certain level of consciousness. Like, you can't turn it off. That was part of it for me. But also, I feel like I was not super privileged, but I had opportunities afforded to me at a younger age that made me see disparities in a different way. I grew up in the Central District of Seattle, which was historically Black, but is now pretty much predominantly white. But at the time, I remember going to a school in that neighborhood, and being privileged, going to a college preparatory school, on track to graduate, had all these things being afforded to me in a predominantly white space. I was the only Black Muslim student, but I was still susceptible to the same things that Anissa was speaking on, of criminalization. I was pretty much close to, not doing so well in my classes, low-key expulsion, like just a lot of things that could have resulted in my failure. But everything was that institution backed me to the point where I didn't get to that point, and I graduated. And I thought about how many students don't have that safety net. Like, I was thinking about, what if they didn't have my back, and I just, like, what would have happened to me in that situation? And then I thought about divestment. I think about how private institutions have all this extra money to, make sure students in certain institutions graduate, make it to the next level in life, but public schooling isn't afforded that same grace. Like Rainier Beach, where I live, that high school consistently is defunded from and divested from. And I always think about how those numbers look and how they attest that to the institution, and not that it's their fault as well. They are the fault, not the students. And I kind of was like, there's no way that I could be afforded these things and it be acceptable, and thought about the gaps of equity, and how that's how criminalization continues. You're criminalizing people for being poor. You're criminalizing people for not having access to things. And I saw myself as a recipient of restorative justice. I kept thinking about how many kids just need a second chance, how many kids just need a little support, a little push, because I was struggling. Like, I was not excelling, but I had a safety net, I had a support system, I had people who were like, no, you're gonna make it. And I thought about how, as Black and brown youth, we're never given a second chance. We're criminalized before we get there. So it's like, how am I supposed to cross that bridge? And then when I got to university, I was like, there's so many things that I'm learning that aren't helping me get to a point of creating equity for my community. It was more about passing classes, learning Eurocentric curriculums and things like that. And so that's when I knew I was like, I can't live just learning this and feeling like this is it. I got to create the change I want to see. And that's kind of what pushed me over the edge. And I started looking into criminal justice and realized there's so many levels of, nuance there too, with the issues of what criminal justice looks like to certain people. And so once I started getting into institutions and working directly with people who are incarcerated, my perspective completely shifted. I was like, it has to be abolition. It has to be a completely different way. No matter what type of justice I get for them out here, it's not really justice as long as those institutions are still standing. And I always just saw so many Black and brown youth I grew up with who ended up in those systems or, something worse. So I was like, this can't be the end all. Be all, because I see my liberation connected to those around me. So just because I'm afforded certain things doesn't mean that I'm better, or that because I have a college degree, I'm more educated. And kind of how Nikita said, our lived experiences speak for ourselves. And I feel like decentralizing, organizing, and those things are what keeps me grounded, because I was like a little baby organizer, like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I know something's wrong here. I need help figuring it out. And that's what kept me going. And I could speak to even Nikita's leadership. Like, I remember meeting Nikita and I was like, I'm hella nervous. Nikita knows all these things. Like, I want to be in the same space as Nikita, and it's just like feeling that love and that grace from folks who have been doing the work is what keeps you going. And that's kind of what kept me going. I want to keep creating that space for other folks and decentralizing that leadership. So I love that y'all brought that up.
It's beautiful. And thank you so much for all the ways you're growing more leadership in our communities with the organizing work you're doing. Meridel, would you like to hop in here and tell us about how you became an organizer?
I am still really uncomfortable with that term. I think of myself as more of a person that's just in the world and aware of what's going on in the world and wanting to know what I can do in a small way, not in a big grand way, but in a small way that's manageable for me, what I can do to help. It was really during the uprising. I mean, we were all really out there, but we were also seeing kind of the devastation of from the riots and justified riots, I'm going to say, but the devastation and that, and I'm connected with like caregivers who were feeling the brunt of it, of not being able to provide basic goods. And so my friends and I kind of all connected, and we started getting connected with specific caregivers who were needing diapers, formula, just basic necessities to just keep going and keep taking care of their kids, but not being able to have the transportation. And that compounded with the pandemic and the loss of jobs. Like, it's been such a hard time for so many people that we all realized that if we pooled our resources, we could get people their basic goods. So my friend Zade and a couple of other folks, we have been doing the Rebellion Relief Fund just to meet caregivers in the Twin Cities basic needs. And then also when I was arrested, Minnesota Freedom Fund was blessed with so many donations. We kind of organized and we worked with them to set aside. Now it's officially it's going to be $1.5 million to go towards supporting protesters who've been arrested and those whatever costs that come with that. Obviously, attorney's fees, transportation, lost wages. Now we're trying to figure out how to do like commissary and those kind of things. And so we've been processing people's applications for those and making sure that the money gets out to them. So it's just been kind of all over the place and plugging in where I can. But one thing I do want to say, or just try to say it as an invitation, I've never done this kind of work before and never at this scale really. And it's not a matter of skill. Obviously, I've turned to other people that have been doing this kind of work and I've learned a lot from them, and I'm still learning a lot to try not to make big mistakes. But a lot of it is just grunt work, and we can all do grunt work. That's what I'm realizing. You don't have to be super smart and you don't have to have a lot of expertise, but you've just got to be willing to learn and try to figure things out as you go. And anybody can do that. And you don't have to think of yourself as an activist or an organizer. You can just be a person that just wants to alleviate some sort of harm, and try to provide people with their basic goods as much as you can, because like Iman had said, like I'm not free until all of us are free. And if somebody's suffering right next to me, I'm not going to sit here and allow that to happen if I can do something about it. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, it was beautiful. And I would really encourage folks to like think about the value of mutual aid. Like one of the most instructive history lessons I ever received was from Aaron Dixon, who helped found the second chapter of the Black Panther Party here in Seattle. And he talked about how the party would meet people's basic needs, whether that was food, like the meal programs that we see in schools started with the Black Panther Party, or that was pest control, or that was helping people get groceries or childcare, because they knew that people would struggle to be politically engaged if they were struggling to meet their basic needs. And if we want people to be able to be engaged, meeting each other's basic needs is really essential. And mutual aid has been such an important part of laying the groundwork for so many movements, whether that's the defund movement or abolitionist movements, or movements to address like everyone having health care. At the end of the day, us building community collaborations to meet each other's needs that are not dependent upon the government's response to us, but really it's just about us being in community, like Metadel was saying, are really powerful ways to build movements that change the world. And we've seen that happen over and over again. So thank you so much for sharing the story of caring for each other. That's what that is, caring for each other, and redistributing the resources that we have, because there is enough amongst us. Jael, how did you get into organizing? How did you get into the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I think my earliest kind of moment of realizing some of these things were going on that I think led me to be so aware was, I can remember in elementary school, we all know the education system does not properly educate on Black history, right? That's just not existent. But I remember we were talking about like Harriet Tubman and freeing the slaves and all these different things, right? They stick to these very three like kind of key figures. And they were talking about how slaves were ignorant. And I'm sitting here reading this like, what is this book talk? Like, why am I being taught this, right? And a student turns around to me and goes, well, that must mean Jael is ignorant, right? And I remember sitting there like, okay, in this moment, I know that's wrong, but I'm also like 9 or 10. Like, how do I start to advocate for myself? How do I start to say something? And I looked to the teacher, right? I remember there being 2 adults in the room, and I looked to them to say something. Nobody said anything. And what ended up actually happening, I think I said something to him, or something ended up happening where we were both held back from recess that day. And I'm sitting here like, wait, why am I in trouble for this, right? Like, what did I do wrong in this situation that brought this upon us? But I can remember that being the very kind of early moments of starting to be like, there's something just painfully wrong here. I can't put my finger on it, but I know it's there. And then more towards when, when the murder of Trayvon Martin happened, I can remember being in the car and actually hearing the verdict on the radio. And I remember when it happened, I was like, there's no way this like I can only expect this to go one way, kind of how we're all expecting the murder of George, like the case to go a certain way because Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd, right? But we're sitting here, and I remember sitting in the car listening to this verdict just in complete shock. Like, I just couldn't figure out how it had gone that way. I couldn't figure out how they were like not good. I just couldn't comprehend that. But I also was sitting there like, I don't even know what to do. And those were the moments where I started to be like, I need to get to a place where I can do something. I want to be in a place where I can start to, something has to change. And that started to be in high school, of talking to different people, talking about our curriculum, talking about why our honors classes look the way they do. Was it really a matter of the lack of the capability of the student, or how you already categorize the student when they were in 3rd grade? Is it really a matter of the fact that you don't believe they are able to do it, or you've told them that they aren't able to do it for so long that now you're no longer shocked by the outcome of our test scores, right? We have all these programs in high school when in reality we should be working with students in K through 5. And so there were so many moments of which I'm like, education is this space I want to be in, because you can't tell me this power exists and then gatekeep it. You can't tell me this power exists and then exclude. You can't tell me this power exists and then tell me who gets to have it and who gets to not have it. It doesn't get to be a societal thing when you tell me what part of society gets to hold on to it. And so those are the moments in which I started to see education as this area in which I wanted to see things change so badly, because it felt like the area and space in which we could find neutral ground. We could do that if everybody came together and made it happen. And when I got to the university, that's honestly why I ran to be student body vice president. I wanted to be in those spaces. I wanted to be in front of administrators because I didn't feel like they were listening. I felt like they got to put diversity, inclusion values on their websites and get money from our Black students and weren't doing one thing for them. I was tired of seeing that Black students saying that the very police that were supposed to be protecting them, they actually needed protection from, and our universities thinking that they were siloed from society and didn't have to address these issues. And that's where a lot of that came from. And I actually ended up being the president of our student body when George Floyd was murdered because our president resigned. And I honestly think that was God's appointment for me, because the fact that I was there in that space and I demanded that our university would sever these ties with so many individuals helping me and uplifting me to write this letter for this demand, so that we could say, you guys don't get to put out another statement with empty promises. You don't get to sit here and tell us that you care. You don't get to sit here and make all these claims for all these changes. Instead of waiting for that, how about I let you know what you can do and you can make that decision in 24 hours. I don't want to have another meeting. I don't want to be waited out. I don't want to sit there and have to continuously hear you tell me things that I know to be true. It's not about the numbers. It's not about the data. I'm telling you that these experiences exist. And that's really a lot of where that came from for me. And throughout the summer, it was working with organizations like Can't Forget the Kids, which my friends started, which made there that kids in Minneapolis just had art supplies, right? They're seeing these traumatic things on the news, and we're sitting here and acting like it's normal, right? Our children are taught police etiquette when they're 3, 4, 5 years old. And we wanted to do that. Or whether it was going to drive and packing food, it was these moments that showed me we have so much work to do, and we all have our space in this movement. We all have what we can do, and we just have to do it. And I know I struggle with sometimes being like organizer, not organizer, activist, not activist, because it sometimes can feel like I'm minimalizing the work that I do, but I often remember like I am a reflection of the work that has been done, and somebody's going to reflect me. So if we sit here and somebody sees me and they're like, you know what, I want to do what Jael did, or that sounds really cool, then my work is not done, but I've completed something, because somebody else is going to go do this somewhere else. And if we all do it somewhere else, then we start to change the world.
Okay, Jael. I wish I could snap while you were talking and just give you big ups. I mean, I want to thank all of you. The stories you just shared were just so deep and informative, but also very different. And I think that is, the value of talking about lived experience first and foremost, because you start to see there are many, many entry points to this work. And there's so many different experiences that people have. I've been thinking a lot. I know a few of y'all on this panel, and including myself, identify as abolitionist. And I've been thinking about the current trial of Derek Chauvin, and thinking about what is the abolitionist world, the vision that we want to see. And I think very often when these very unjust, horrific things happen, even those of us who say we're abolitionists go back to the same system that fails to deliver every time. I remember in 2013 being in New York City working at the Center for Constitutional Rights when the not guilty verdict came down for George Zimmerman. And I really had to ask myself deeply, like, what am I grappling with here? What am I really angry about? And what am I actually hoping to see in the future? What does justice really look like? And so, I would love to hear from y'all in this context where we're fighting, we're pushing back against anti-Black policing institutions. We're pushing back against mass incarceration in prisons that we know don't make our community safer. What is our real vision for justice? What does it look like, and how do we get there? And what are the different things that we need to be organizing for in order to see our abolitionist vision become a reality? And Jael, I'm just going to start with you, let you hop right in there, and then whomever else wants to jump in after Jael's finished, come through.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nikita. I think I struggle with this sometimes because I think I've sat on panels with law enforcement and they've, kind of given their side and I've listened to it. And then you sit there and you're like, okay. But then every time I almost start to be like, I'm starting to understand how possibly we could not do this. I think of the fact that we've had Black and brown bodies on the streets at the hands of law enforcement for years. I think about the fact that policing and law enforcement in its inception was racist. You cannot cut off a tree unless you uproot its roots. And that is where policing is rooted in, is racism. So when we're talking about this, it's not, people love to bring up the bad apple argument. And I think it's absolutely always to me diffused and refuted because it's not about one individual person. We are talking about a system. We're talking about policing, not just with law enforcement, but in schools. We're talking about suspensions, we're talking about expulsions. We're talking about policing in its entirety. And that system itself is racist. And any system that has lives on its hands and any other part of our society would be removed. You cannot argue with me differently. And so when we see these things happening, to me, it's a matter of the only people who have had our back is us. When we're talking about things like mutual aid, when you're talking about the individuals that are keeping us afloat in Minneapolis, when things were happening in our cities, the people who were rebuilding, the people who were cleaning up, the people who were bringing food to each other was us. It was not the city. It was not our state. It was not the nation. So when these things are happening, I think of if we're able to continue to sustain ourselves, I'm giving you your basic necessities, we can also keep each other safe. The only reason you don't believe in it is because you've never seen it and somebody has told you it's impossible. First of all, police are reactionary. They don't prevent crime. Police come after a crime has happened. They come after something has happened. And people view policing as a symbol of safety. What do you do to the person that tells you that they view them as a system of threat? What do you do to the person that sits there and tells you their presence actually scares me more than it keeps me safe? And safety is not the fence that you build around, right? It's a feeling that you have. And so when we're talking about what our communities need to see and what our communities need to have, it's the feeling of safety, right? No barrier, no physical thing is going to help us in that way. And so I always think of we have to reimagine this whole thing in the lens of our community and the way our community needs to see it. Do I have the answer to that? I couldn't tell you, but I could tell you that I want to know the people around me. What do you want to see? What does that look like? What does it mean to be safe for you? And honestly, we've kept each other safe for years. We've been backing each other safe for years, whether it's on the street, whether it's what time to come home, whether it's the very mechanisms in which our parents were telling us for years was a way to keep us safe because they knew what was out there. So it's looking at that and continuously remember that we've had our own back. They don't get to tell us how to have our back.
Yes, everything that you said. I do want to say I'm a baby abolitionist, so I'm still learning and I'm still I'm still doing a lot of reading and listening. And I struggle because of my own traumas, my own experiences. I do struggle with abolition. And I think that whenever we have our conversation about abolition, I always want to center the fact that like when we're inviting other people into that conversation, we have to invite the people that have been harmed as well, and make space for that and make space for the learning also gentle in that way, because I really do struggle with abolition. I believe in abolition. I believe that we can't be caging people and disappearing people. But then also I am struggling, especially when it comes to, and I apologize to bring this up, a trigger warning about sexual assault. But when it comes to sexual assault, the reason why I have moved towards abolition, even when it comes to those kind of issues, is because I realize that these institutions do nothing to keep us safe. The MPD they had the huge scandal of the 1,700 rape kits that were not tested going back like 40 years. And so we're not any safer because we have police. We're not any safer from getting, murdered because the police are also murdering us. So I think it's one of those things where I want to, for anyone that's listening, I want to just like as a gentle reminder that it's not something that is easy to talk about or think about. And a lot of it is actually doing trauma work within yourself. And hopefully if you can get connected with a therapist to work through those things. I am pro-abolition. Also, really always wanting to talk about that other side of it, that it is really painful sometimes to have these conversations. But my beliefs are rooted in the fact that I don't feel safer because we have a carceral state. Thanks.
Iman or Anissa? I see
Yeah.
you, Iman. Yeah.
Go next, sir. Thank you. I was just listening and taking everything that you all were saying in, and I was like, I hear all of that. And I think that's the hardest part, right? It's like abolition can be thrown back in our face as a way to be like, well, y'all care about not incarcerating folks. Let's let the people who do the corruption off the hook. And it's like, it's not like that. It's supposed to be something that we're constantly working towards. And also it's supposed to be mutual, like the mutual aid of like, you know, supporting one another in times of hardship. And so yeah, trigger warning again to what she was saying about like sexual assault, like that's real. Because I feel like a lot of women, like we want to feel safe after feeling something or dealing with something firsthand. But the reality is we don't feel safer. I know I don't feel safer knowing that people are incarcerated for those things because a lot of people are let off the hook. So it's like it's selective justice, and that's my concern. What type of justice do you guys, or does the system imply by saying that people who do certain things need to be incarcerated? And also, I just feel like at the end of the day, the abolition has to not be used as a buzzword to negate all the efforts being done to actually push towards a real abolition. Because I feel like now everyone's like, well, we just need abolition without fully understanding all that entails, and that it's something we have to like constantly work towards. And it's deeper than just removing carceral systems, because we don't want them to be revamped in new ways, because we saw what happened with slavery. They got rid of slavery. They're like, cool, we'll just remake it with prisons. Like, no, we don't want another system in place after we get rid of prisons. I mean, I'm hoping for the day that we get to a point where we don't need those systems, but I want to challenge myself to look at what is the next system that can be used, like maybe like house arrest, or, you know, like watching us through like virtual platforms, digital tracking of folks. Like, we don't want people to feel like there's another system in place to track them or trap them too after we get rid of prisons. So yeah, I like how Jael brought up like anything that touches the law and people who are in the systems of law, like all of that just needs to go, because one of it is infected, it's infecting all of those systems. And I also think there's no type of justice that can be achieved without the community on the inside. Like I always think about how, if let's say people are like, oh, we're getting all these, you know, these new funds, you know, we're getting equity, you know, we're getting education equity, we're doing all these things for the community out here. And I'm like, okay, so let's say, you know, there's a 5-year plan, great. But what about folks on the inside? Are you just going to just throw them away until it's more convenient for you to speak on their issues? Like, that's always been a moral issue for me of like, these needs to be in conjunction with one another. I don't see them to be one or the other. It's the same issue. Like, we're all together in this. And so I even struggle with how society frames it as a separatist thing of like, oh, well, we can deal with that when we get there and we have to cross that bridge. It's like, no, we need to cross that bridge today or yesterday. We need to do it right now. And so that's kind of what I struggle with, of people trying to misuse abolition, and also people trying to just throw it in there as something that can be used as like a cover up for all the issues that have happened systemically. Because Black people have never wanted revenge. That has never been the agenda. And you can also see that with abolition. We're literally saying, let's rebuild community, let's reimagine community, let's help one another work through trauma. And we don't want to validate the same system we're going up against. And that's kind of what I struggle with. Like, even when I see all these horrible things, and with the George Floyd trial, I have to tell myself, I'm not going to get satisfaction or justice for his family by that one officer being incarcerated. I need that whole system dismantled. And so that's what Nikita was speaking on about. What am I really grappling with? That's kind of what I feel like. I need to not find happiness or satisfaction with the conviction. It's deeper than a conviction rate. It's, you know, it's the whole system. The whole system got to go. And so that's kind of that's what I struggle with. And I'm still, you know, like, I'm a baby abolitionist. I'm still trying to figure it out, but that's kind of where I've been thinking and reflecting on.
Yes, to everything you all have said. I honestly, coming into abolitionist and like the framework and doing my readings, what's the most difficult for me is untangling the policing in our own minds that or like the white supremacy structures that we're upholding in our own minds. That has been the most difficult part for me to grapple with, and I'm still grappling with it. But yeah, everything that was said prior, I don't think jailing a few killer cops is going to provide any justice or prevent any more Black or brown death. Like, that's not going to save me or individuals who look like me. And also what I have difficulty with is like reimagining the system. Like, I don't want to reimagine anything that looks even like an inkling similar to what we currently have. Like, I want all of this gone. Like, this isn't, and then when all of this was popping off this summer, you see brand new Black executive directors in these same white supremacist organizations, like put Black faces in high places to like, Cornel West says that, like, more Black faces in high places. That's not going to fix it. Like, electing Kamala Harris as vice president is not going, that did not stop the drones from hitting Somalia, where both of my parents are from. Like, that is not saving me. And also, how do we take it from the context of just America and American policing and do that globally? Like, what's happening right now with Bolivia, and how the US is always undermining any sort of anti-capitalist framework that is happening. And so how do we have solidarity to the folks in Palestine, to the folks in Syria? How do we hold, I was hearing a lot about accountability, like once Joe Biden gets elected, we're going to hold him accountable. Where's that accountability? How do we get that? I don't know. I haven't seen it. It's like, we cannot hold these individuals who are in such a powerful place accountable. That's mind-boggling. I am not in community with Joe Biden, don't really want to be, but like, how does that accountability work when there's such a power differential? And when will we as a people go beyond putting individuals in places and expecting them to save us, and rely on each other and rely on the networks that we already have to save one another? Because these systems will never save us, ever. So we need to create a new system where we are relying on one another, where we're connecting with our neighbors. Like, get to know your neighbors. And so when someone's playing music too loud, you don't have to call the police, because you don't know what's going to result in that. Like, get to know the individuals around your network, around your area or where you live, and start building connections there, because that's true community to me, and that's true protection, and that's true safety. And get off those neighborhood association Facebook pages, because that's just another form of policing.
Thank you so much. I get dragged in those neighborhood pages a lot for being a publicly known abolitionist in our city. But I think what it comes down to when I see folks' comments is actually a lot of fear, and it's a lot of worry, and a lot of I think misplaced distrust. You know, we're all trained to believe that if you call 911, then you'll receive some sort of response. But if you're Black or brown in the United States, you know that calling 911 is probably not safe for you or the people around you because of our lived experiences. And this is not anecdotal, it's also factual based on statistics. But the thing that I really think about is Anissa, where you ended was community. What are we doing to strengthen and make our communities healthier? Here in the Duwamish territories in Seattle, there are a lot of folks without homes, and we've been in a state of emergency around housing affordability and homelessness for over 6 years. And, you know, we talk about, and Medidel, you brought this up, policing is reactionary. It doesn't respond to the actual crisis. And so what if we had homes for everyone? What if everyone had healthy food, clean water? What if everyone had access to full spectrum, gender affirming healthcare? What if we made sure that we had real drug supports for folks? What if we made sure that sex workers were safe, and made sure that rather than criminalizing folks, we decriminalized it so that we could make sure people have the ability to protect one another? There are just so many other ways that we could be responding to the things that happen in our communities. And as someone who works with young people who are going through the juvenile criminal punishment system, I see firsthand how courts and police don't actually offer healing to those who have survived harm, nor those who have caused harm. And so what can we be doing to be thinking about a world that actually promotes healing and care and thinks about prevention and intervention rather than just reactionary responses after the fact? I want to see communities where we're safer. And there are actually ways to make that happen. And I think at the end of the day, abolition is partially about what we want to dismantle, but it is much more about what we strive to build. So in our last 4 or 9 minutes, I think we have an extra 5. I would love for each of you to share maybe your greatest lesson as organizers, or at least a lesson that maybe right now is really sticking with you that you think folks listening to this conversation could benefit from? And I won't call on whomever to go first, because I know maybe you needed a moment to think. And I'll let whoever has something on their mind to jump in first.
I'll go. I think something that I'm just thinking about right now, I don't know if it's my biggest lesson, is making sure to keep the door behind you open. You know, like I think I've been invited in a lot of spaces and I've had a lot of opportunities that I'm very grateful for. But I think something that I just keep seeing being blessed on me is people turning around when they reach some sort of new accomplishment or they get into some new space. They turn around and they make sure that the door is open, the window is open, like everything's open, and just kind of sharing resources with one another, whatever those resources are. So I think mutual aid as a way of life is something that I'm trying to practice in every like aspect of my life, and I feel like that has been the most healing part of this time that we're all in. So I hope that made sense.
Yeah, I love that. And also it just drives us to think about how can we do less gatekeeping? As we learn things, how can we view this as community knowledge? And how can we see our community collaborations as a part of our collective liberation? I think capitalism has tricked us into thinking there's not enough. And it's also tricked us into hoarding, whether that's money or knowledge from each other. Really, our liberation is going to come in our willingness to just open the floodgates and share what we have and realize there is more than enough when we are willing to share. Jael, were you about to unmute? I want to bring you in here.
I was. Thank you, Nikita. I think of two things. So there's a quote by Angela Davis that goes, I'm choosing not to, I'm gonna misquote and I want to get this right. I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I cannot accept. And I think that has always helped me whenever I feel like, oh, I'm doing this wrong, or I'm sitting there and we don't talk about how people negatively get in your DM or how people say things to you, or just even like the threats on your own safety, but you sit there and you're thinking about like somebody else didn't accept this. I don't have to accept this either. And we're going to get there. Like we are going to get there. And I think this has always helped me like keep me grounded in that I can't accept this any longer. And I want to get to a point where we are at a place where this is no longer a thing that people don't have to accept. And I think the other thing that really keeps me through the summer is I watched a clip by Angela Rye, and she talked about, this country promises life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and we're still stuck at life. And that has stuck with me so much because people try to make these issues so divisive, so one side, different side, offense, defense. And we're talking about people's humanities, and our humanity is not up for discussion. Murder is a nonpartisan issue. A man was murdered. We were talking about this before the call. I just don't understand why we're still arguing about it. And remembering that this is about people's humanities and people's right to existence, and the fact that we have to call it a right, or call it some sort of privilege, as if we get to decide who lives and who dies. And so in that, I'm always remembering that we're fighting for our humanity, and our humanity is all interwoven. Everyone's humanity is interwoven, and no one gets to choose who's it. Like our Constitution having the 3/5, right? They thought they could do that. They thought they could tell us how much we were worth, but our humanity is not up for discussion or engagement with other people. It's up to us to decide what that is and demand that we are seen for the people that we are. And so every day, I think I'm just reminded of this is a human issue, and we have to all see that.
Absolutely. And James Baldwin says, we can have conversations about things until that conversation basically denies me my human dignity. And so I feel like that's where we're at. Thank you so much for calling more of our great ancestors into the conversation. Iman, what are you thinking? I can see you over there.
I'm like nodding to everything. I'm like, yes, like speak on it. Like that's how I feel, and I feel a lot of it is like the accessibility to education or political education. I feel like that's something that is really, I feel privileged to be in a space where I can, read, know what to read and look up to folks, but also a part of it of like what Meridel said about like leaving the door open for folks behind you. And that's kind of like why I got into this idea of like, okay, I need to just speak on how I feel without worrying about, the repercussions, or that I can have a voice. And so doing little things like podcasting, like as a Black woman, I just feel like my voice is so invisible all the time, especially as a Muslim woman. So I'm like, I'm sure other people and people of shared identities and people who don't get to speak out have similar viewpoints, but just can't speak on them. We just got to have, we got to decentralize the idea of what knowledge is. And so I feel like that's kind of like why I jumped into that platform of like, I'm just going to speak on how I feel. And this can be knowledge, because at the end of the day, we're learning from one another. And I feel like we need to I need to remind myself that it's deeper than being able to have certain titles and things like that. We just got to leave the door open for one another and build each other up. And I also learned for myself, like my safety nets were women who looked like me. Like it was always Black women who had their hand open for me and like making sure to tell me like, it's okay if you don't know what you're doing, or it's okay that you're crying, or it's okay that you're struggling. Like I'm here for you and I see you. And I feel like that is what kept me going. So, cause sometimes I'm like, I don't even know if I'm built for this, low key, like, even before this, I had a heavy call and I was like, I'm about to break down, but like, it's deeper than that. It's deeper than the individual. So when you have the community supporting you, it doesn't become a you thing. It's a group thing. We're doing this together. We're doing this as a collective. And that's what kept me going. Because before I was like, I don't know nothing. So if I mess up, I'm gonna just tap out. Like I'm gonna just take the L. Like I'm gonna just, putting all this weight on yourself. But it's really not that deep. Like people are like, I've been doing this for years. I got you. Let me show you. And it's like, okay, like it's fine. And I think being okay with making those mistakes and being vulnerable, I think, is what taught me the most and was what helped me learn the most. And that's what I want to afford to other people and other community members. Like, we got this, like we could do this together. So yeah.
Yes, we do got this. The biggest lesson I learned is something you touched upon, Nikita, earlier, is that you need to meet people where they're at and make sure that they have access to the material conditions to be able to enter spaces and to assist in organizing. So while we were organizing to remove police from schools, it was asking restaurants like, hey, can you package food? We're doing a teach-in. Can we make sure that these students have access to food while we're also teaching them about why police don't belong in schools and the 101 ways they're being criminalized in schools, and also being able to provide emotional support, making sure that they have a space to come to. We made sure that there was just like space for just Black and brown folks that was not perpetuated by whiteness. And it wasn't to say like, oh, you guys can't. Well, I mean, sometimes they just don't need to be in spaces. And so ensuring that there is a safe space for Black and brown individuals to unpack and to have that safety network, like, oh, you need a coat, we have a coat, here it is. You need a ride to go to the school event where they're holding community sessions or conversations about policing. This is how we get there. And so that was the biggest lesson I learned. And also it was about how Black women really are there for you and how they lift you up in your network. And so, yeah, thank you all so much. I'm like honored to be in the presence of you all today.
As am I. Thank you so much to each of you. I do want to take a moment and acknowledge that today is the Transgender Day of Visibility. And I want to lift up that trans liberation is inextricably interconnected with all of our collective liberation. And I want to lift up Black trans women like Marsha P. Johnson, who have been on the forefront of so many movements. If it wasn't for folks like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, we wouldn't be having some of the conversations we're having. And when I think about Pride, I remember that Stonewall was a riot against police brutality. So I want to end our conversation by lifting up our trans siblings and really amplifying that, supporting that, and also encouraging our Black women. Thank you so much for having so many people's backs, for building, nurturing community. So much of the work we see happening, so much of the history we get taught would not exist without Black women. So much love to each of you. Thank you so much for your care and your analysis. I feel like I learned a lot in this last hour, so much appreciation.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm honored to be sharing this space with y'all. It's been really beautiful. So thank you.